Hello.
Trucks.
Hey.
Hey. As you can probably hear, we have a special guest in the truck cabin today. Where is he physically located? I don't know.
Yeah, neither do I. It's really weird not knowing where you're physically located.
This is the existential angst that I always experience when Josh is parking and I can see that I don't actually exist.
This is probably going to be a major improvement for some of our viewers because Rob's voice, I think, is more distinct than mine and Isaac's.
Exactly. So you will probably be able to tell that he is
the one
speaking
talking.
And not us.
Yeah, that's true. Although there are now 3 voices to distinguish, so there's an inherent, jump in difficulty there, so there are 2 countervailing forces.
Welcome to Trucks Cast Hard Mode, everybody.
Absolutely. You tried the rest, now test your vest.
Yes, perfect.
Exactly what you just said.
I've been taking lessons from Schmorky. Anyway,
Oh, we didn't do the thing. Hold on.
What?
We're in Lille. We've got electronics. We're
That's
taking them
right.
to Innsbruck. They look like this. Oh god, that's nondescript.
We are incredibly generic today, guys. So anyway, we talked about Henry Darger for 5 minutes on an episode a while back, and I got basically everything about him wrong.
No, I think you got maybe one thing about him wrong, but then I sort of fixated on that thing, and because that's what I do.
But anyway, I thought that I might take the opportunity to bring you on here to set the record straight about that particular thing.
Okay.
And then after that, indulge in some of the amazing internet stuff. I suppose I should say that our guest today is Rob.
Yes, his name is Rob.
Who is under the name of Nostalgia Brayist on the internet and does one of our favorite blogs.
Oh, thank you.
Anywho, why?
Because it's doing the thing again. Don't worry about it. I'll worry about it.
That's fine.
Okay.
So anyway, Rob, what did I fail to understand about Henry Darger when I was talking about Henry Darger before?
Perhaps we should provide the most basic background on who the hell this is.
Yeah.
I think Rob could probably also do that.
So I suppose I could. Oh, and by the way, before I even go into anything, we actually don't know whether his name was pronounced Darger or Darger. So actually either is acceptable. They've interviewed his neighbors and none of them can remember. His landlord can't remember apparently, which is really weird. His landlord is the guy who's sold all of the paintings and everything. But when I bought the most recent biography of him, this ultra stereotypical hipster douchebag Strand employee helped me find it, but insisted on correcting my pronunciation.
By calling him to Darger or from Darger?
To Darger when I was saying Darger, which is one of those weird things where it's a correction, but it's wrong. It's either. But anyway,
That's kind of the way people
Strand.
capitalize.
Yeah, no, that guy was really weird because he also read the subtitle, which was The Tragic Life of an Outsider Artist. He read that back to me and was like, yeah. But was it really so tragic? I was he was in this infamously inhumane mental institution in the turn of the 20th century in Chicago. And I sort of partially finished with that sentence and realized that wasn't really the kind of thing that
you were supposed to talk about too.
Yeah, that was just a weird interaction. All right, sorry, I've gotten that thing from a month ago off of my chest. Never talked to anyone about it before, but okay. Anyway, to do what I was going to do. So Henry Darger or Darger was a man who was born, I think, around 1890. That's not the date, but it was around then, and lived until maybe the mid-1960s, I think. And so what he's famous for. Yeah, so he was a reclusive man. He was a dishwasher. That was his job for most of his life. He didn't really talk to anyone. He lived in an apartment in Chicago for many years, and so he's not the kind of person who would have really become famous if it hadn't been for the fact that when his landlord sort of went into his apartment when he was cleaning it out, not after Henry had died, but after Henry had become too ill to stay there and was living in a nursing home, his landlord found first a large number of paintings, hundreds of very large canvases depicting a lot of really strange and interesting things, a lot of sort of battle scenes where sort of the main participants were children, a lot of these sort of chimeric beasts, and things like that, a lot of really brutal sort of battle and torture scenes, and then Nathan Lerner, Henry's landlord, found a large number of sort of amateurly bound, typed out books, these sort of manuscripts.
I've seen one of these on display at the American Folk Art Museum. They are very strange looking objects.
Yeah, they are. So there were a number of things. The one that became most famous is the 15-volume fantasy epic entitled The Story of the Vivian Girls in What Is Known as the Realms of the Unreal of the Glendeco-Angelinian War Storm Caused by the Child Slave Rebellion. It's around, I think it's 15,145 pages in 15 volumes. He kept a journal. He kept sort of a weather journal. He wrote a sequel to what is conventionally shortened to The Realms or The Realms of the Unreal. He wrote a sequel to that entitled Further Adventures in Chicago, Crazy House, which was, I think, around 5,000 pages. He also wrote something called, I think it's The History of My Life. I'm not sure that's right, but he wrote a sort of quasi-autobiography. What it was sort of a conventional autobiography that went on for about 200 pages, and it changed course dramatically when he reached the point when he started talking about this, I think it was a tornado called Sweetie Pie, which I'm not actually really sure if this was a real thing he had observed at some point, or he was just sort of riffing about this imaginary tornado, because he's very, very interested in storms. It was one of his obsessions, and so he sort of veers off course in this autobiography and spends the remaining 4,800 pages of it talking about the wake of destruction caused by Sweetie Pie, and he no longer turns up in the narrative.
Okay.
And so anyway, so those are the things that he wrote, and he's most famous for The Realms. The Realms is famous for a number of reasons. I mean, for one thing, it's one of the longest works of fiction ever produced by a human. You can kind of go back and forth on what is the longest book, how do you count series, how do you count things that have 600 volumes and, are made for 12-year-olds, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But it's really, really long. And it's one of the most famous examples of sort of, I mean, his paintings are some of the most famous examples of outsider art, quote-unquote.
Why am I making the quoting gestures?
Isaac's making air quotes for good reason. They're examples of sort of, art produced by people who didn't have artistic training and were essentially kind of producing it of their own, I guess, internal volition. Who were not producing it for recognition. I mean, so this guy expected no one to see this, did not intend anyone to see either his art or his fictional writing or his nonfiction writing. When Nathan Lerner discovered all of this stuff, he went to see Henry in the nursing home, and he told Henry he'd discovered all of this stuff, and the first thing Henry said was, "Oh my god, it's over." And the second thing Henry said after Nathan asked, "Well, what do you want me to do?" is, "Please burn all of it." Nathan Lerner did not do this. In fact, he sort of... So the paintings were all kind of bound together in like a binding, and he tore them out of their binding and started selling them as like pieces of high art, which they had. So they have this very... Henry Darger was not a good artist. Or not a good, like... I don't know what the word is. Draftsman? There we go. Okay. Yeah. He didn't know how to, like, draw figures, so he traced them, and in his job, so he worked as a dishwasher, he also worked as a janitor for a time, and he collected a lot of, like, newspaper clippings and clippings of things, of people, of comics and stuff like that, and would kind of trace them. He would do a thing where he would go and, like, get them enlarged, so that he could have figures in the proper size. And so his paintings have this kind of like...
They look like collage.
They have this collage aspect, mixed media, and they have this kind of aspect of kind of a combination of sophistication levels.
Okay, so my question, which I think is the natural question, is why did this fellow who discovered this think anybody would be interested in seeing it, and why was he right?
So I think that's what I'm kind of trying to answer. So I think the reason... so Nathan Lerner was a guy who was active in the art world. I mean, in addition to being a landlord. He didn't, like, go into the art world because of this. He looked at these and thought, from what I knew of being involved in the Chicago art world, I know these would sell, which was true. And I think it's because they have, as I said, they have this kind of combination of differing levels of sophistication. So they have all of these kind of mythological elements, the chimeric beasts called Blengiglomanian serpents, or Blengans for short. They have sort of all of these strange things with, children with butterfly wings, and, these strange torture scenes. and like gigantic battles. There's this combination of like what I'm speaking now from the perspective of like what I imagine sort of our patrons would see in this combination of kind of childlike innocence and kind of death and destruction and kind of mythological Christian themes and kind of clear artistic technique combined with clear artistic incompetence. And a lot of these things are, I think, the kinds of things that an artist might deliberately...
It sounds a little bit like they're less into his art than they are just into the curiosity of the dude.
Oh, I think that's perfectly true. And I think what I'm trying to say is there's an element of that, and then there's an element of also this stuff kind of looks like modern art. It looks like the kind of modern art that has a studied primitivism to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's this one of the things about the appeal of outside art in general is that a thing that is generally prized in any form that has hit its modernity and then hit its postmodernity, as art had even at that point in the 50s, is novelty. The piece of art that does not seem to come from anywhere but is self-consistent and thematic, and that's also the thing. Everybody, if you're an artist, you have to essentially do the same thing over and over and over and over again, or else people will think that you didn't do it on purpose. And you need a brand, and so here's this like guy who's got this obsessively self-consistent brand, and also doesn't look like anything else because he's essentially been cut off from any kind of like mainstream artistic tradition.
Right. Well, I mean, he's completely not cut off from the tradition of like comics and sort of popular,
which is well, like, I mean, yeah, but in terms of like what the art world is doing,
right.
this is before pop art. This is before like there was a crossover between those two elements, and so he's kind of anticipating that movement as well.
Yeah.
And so. And you know, and there's a killer backstory to go with it.
Right. Yeah. And so I mean, and I should also say that like, so I've read a bit. There's an interesting, I think it's a master's thesis someone wrote about, kind of partially about Darger's work, but and his texts, but also about like the sort of response from the art world to them. That was very kind of sharply critical of the response to the art world, which is, I guess, the bias I had already going into reading this thing. It's available on the internet, by the way, and I really recommend it. But, so one of the things that this thesis...
We won't put the link in the dooblydoo.
I'll try and put the link in the dooblydoo.
Okay. One of the things that the thesis stresses over and over again is that a lot of the things people have said about him, and this includes, like, sort of art scholars writing in, like, introductions to collections and things like that, he's just, like, remarkably full of shit. In the way that it will stress over and over again. I don't know why art people are so obsessed with this, but it will stress over and over again, like, how he just supposedly reflects the uncorrupted state of the human mind, because, like, he didn't interact with the high culture that you and I, you know, our souls are distorted by. And look at this primitive man, blah, blah, blah. Like, and, you know... I mean, there's so many things wrong with it. And this is one of the reasons you should read this thesis, because you will read these people, and they're just, like, there are sort of less crude versions of that view, more sophisticated ones that you can kind of go back and forth about, but the stuff that she quotes in this thesis is just like, wow, this is just like the crude version. This is the completely full of shit, like, version of this kind of idea. And that is like the state of the art in Henry Darger commentary. Well, the state of the art is actually different now, but it's kind of full of shit in a different way, which I can get into. But
yeah, please. It seems like reflexive marketing.
It seems like everything about the fact that this guy has even, you know, been heard of is cruel and should never have happened.
I mean, I suppose that this is the question of like merit, artistic merit, literary merit. Probably not literary merit.
Yeah. That's another interesting thing, because although his paintings have been sold and are fetch high prices and are thought of as like what he did, the books have kind of been ignored. So they're in the American Folk Art Museum in our city here. You can't really look at them. You can sometimes look at little snippets of them if they're having them as part of an exhibit, right. Which won't be like a Darger exhibit. It'll be like a general like exhibit about war, and then they'll have a little battle passage or something. And this seems weird to me because, like, you know, I don't know, personally, I'm just like a guy. I guess I'm more like a text person than like a visual art person, and I really have an interest in like long books and stuff. But
And the paintings are also like explicitly illustrative of the stuff that's happening.
Entirely. Yeah, they were not like they were like illustrating the story. He painted them later, but they were like illustrating the story. So this has always seemed. It's always been something that somehow just like maybe irrationally, maybe not out of proportion, but I've always just been annoyed by this. There's no real movement to, like, publish the books. I mean, they've been published in short excerpts. But I think so Nathan Lerner is dead now, and his widow, Kyoko Lerner, has kind of, like... So I don't understand the nuances of this, but she has some sort of control over, like, the copyright on all of this stuff, and she is very controlling of, like, rights to, like, publish even snippets of the text and stuff like that. I don't really know why. I have not been able to figure out from a lot of Googling what her motivation there is. And it's just one of those things where, to me, when I heard about Henry Darger, the first thing I thought was, man, I want to read these books. This is fascinating. Look at this guy who, like, lived in, his own fascinating world. He would just go out and do his job every day and come back, and he didn't really talk to people that much. And he just had this complete, full-blown fictional world with hundreds of characters.
How do these people even get the rights to his work?
I don't really.
I imagine that he died intestate, and that the contents of his apartment
this all strikes me as seriously exploitative. Like, I have to wonder if they aren't afraid that if people were to read the books, then like that would eliminate their cash cow, because.
Oh, that actually is. So sorry, go ahead.
Like, maybe they would realize this is shit. This is the crazy ramblings of a crazy man.
Well. Yeah, and that is one of... So the thesis that I was talking about, I can't remember the name of the author, but the thesis I was just talking about basically makes that claim. Specifically, so this is one of the big... This is sort of the elephant in the room when you're talking about Henry Darger, is there's a lot of really fucked up shit in all of his work. A lot of violence, a lot of kids, a lot of naked kids getting tortured. Just like a lot of, a lot of fucked up shit. And people... I think...
his general profile and output would not be out of place as a Monster of the Week on like Profiler or another or Bones or
I feel like
whatever serial killer of the week.
I feel like if Darger had tried to sell his own work while he was alive, it would have never flown.
Well, that intentionality to sell your work makes you part of the art movement, and therefore not an outsider artist, and therefore you
become like subject to
critical standards.
Yeah. Though I mean, there's some pretty fucked up shit that sells in the art world with intention. But,
right.
Yeah, but I mean,
you generally have to there has to be some sort of layer
you need to be able to sell yourself.
Artist statement or irony.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I always feel skeptical of those things, but it's true that people do them, and you got to do them like competently, I guess.
They are the main thing that let people sell their art.
Yeah. But so I think with Henry Darger, so the thing that this thesis was arguing is basically so there's this sort of this is one of the reasons I actually am interested in Henry Darger is that so I can't read these books. I can only read little snippets. And the way that you get access to more than little snippets secondhand is you read the people who have gone in and told the American Folk Art Museum, like, I'm doing a project. Let me in so I can do my thesis or whatever. And then they go in and they read a bunch of this stuff intensely for a short time. You can't read all of this stuff. There's a guy who spent 10 years writing a biography. John McGregor, who's sort of like the... I don't know what the correct fictional analogy is here. John McGregor is a guy who spent 10 years writing about Henry Darger, and he didn't read all of his stuff because you can't. They're 25,000 pages or whatever, but he read a lot of it. He's the biggest source for all the rest of us who can't read this stuff. He's also a hardcore Freudian, old school hardcore Freudian. His entire 700-page book is all about Henry Darger's repressed drives, and you can see his repressed drives here, and and it's it's one of these great all of these people are super unreliable narrators, and they're the only source of information you have, and you've got to read these people who are John McGregor. It's almost like you're reading
It's like the critic in Pale Fire.
Right, yeah. But it's like that. It's like you're reading John McGregor, you're reading this super almost cliche parody Freudian. And then you need to try to undo that transformation to get to what you're interested in.
It sounds like a great puzzle box.
Oh yeah, no, it's great.
It's great. If nothing else.
So anyway, I've been rambling around this point for ages, but what the author of this thesis was saying was that basically she thought if people got to do what she got to do, which is read the texts, read as much of the text that they want, they would realize that, like, so you can make arguments about,
you would realize he was just a garden variety sicko.
Yeah, you can make arguments, which I've always been sympathetic to the idea of, he's depicting torture because, like, I mean, he was in the Chicago mental institution, which is very inhumane. They, did bad things to these kids, and he created this whole fantasy world raced around that, where, like, I mean, because the fantasy world is, like, it's, I'm not gonna go too much into it, but it's like, basically good Christian nations fighting evil atheist nations that have an institutionalized child slavery, and like children play this important role in the war. There was sort of a child slave rebellion uprising which failed, but that kind of catalyzed the other nations to say, okay, this is fucked up, we're gonna go in. And then, there's this, so the 7 main characters, the 7 Vivian girls, are sort of these, like, Girl Scouts, essentially, but who play a very important role in, like, the Christian armies.
Uh-oh.
And so... Sorry, good?
I said uh-oh, that's all.
Go ahead.
Okay. So it's very much, like, it's exactly, if you're imagining this guy as, like, fucked up shit happened to me as a kid, I'm gonna imagine a world of, like, heroic kids fighting bad adults on, like, an epic scale with battles with billions of people clashing on a giant planet with trillions of people, and it's all super religious, that's what he would do. So, and that's kind of a sympathetic thing,
Sure, yeah.
But then, so that's been kind of the Henry Darger was kind of a good guy point, which of course I'm sympathetic to. It sounds nice, and what people like the author of this thesis are saying is, well, you can think that because you haven't read the books. If you read the books, you'd see he just goes on for hundreds of pages about kids getting tortured, and after a while you kind of wonder, like,
how much he's enjoying himself, and for
me,
what
though,
reasons.
like,
if he wasn't, why would he be doing it? Yeah.
No matter how fucked up this guy is, like, the part of this which makes me the angriest is the way the art world kind of cannibalized him.
No, definitely, it's true. Yeah, and if you read this thesis, which I recommend, you will get angrier. It's pretty bad.
The art world cannibalizes everyone. It's a matter of how well you're able to defend yourself from it.
Yeah, but it's like, okay, it's like... What is it? Poets, like, I think it was Sylvia Plath, wanted their poems burned when they died, and it's like, it's, what a blessing that they weren't burned, because now we have all these...
Because now people manage to sell them for enormous amounts of money.
But also we have all these amazing, enriching Sylvia Plath poems. But with Henry Darger, I don't know, it's like, this guy was weird, and maybe you should have just let him burn his stuff.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's not, like, with Sylvia Plath, like, let's just bracket the quality of their work for a moment and imagine... Let's just look at the difference, the other difference, which is that when Sylvia Plath's poems weren't burned, she was remembered as a great poet, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And, like, everybody loves Sylvia Plath, sort of. I mean, no one thinks she was a weird sicko. Whereas with Henry Darger, it seems like the entire exhibit here is what a weird sicko he probably was.
I mean, I feel like my interest is not exactly what a weird sicko he was, and I feel very interested in him. I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I feel like, to be honest, my opinion when it gets down to it is like, I don't think there is an afterlife from which people can look down upon the world. I think Henry Darger is dead,
yes.
And I think what we do with this stuff now does not matter to the atoms that once composed him, and like...
You don't need to, like, invoke spirituality to...
Well, right, but it's just like, I feel like what we do with it now is a matter of what will be good for the people who are left, and in some ways, to me, it's just as like, an example... Just sort of as an example of an unusual man, and a man who had a very interesting... So he had a very interesting relationship with God, a very interesting personal relationship with God, as an example of the way people use fiction writing kind of as therapy, mm-hmm. the way people have an intensely personal relationship with fiction that isn't meant for recitation. I mean, to be honest, like, his stuff outside of the, like, well, how sick was he in what ways, outside of the human mind uncorrupted by civilization, outside of all that crap, he's a really interesting story from, like, 10 different angles at once. The religion angle, the literature angle, the therapy...
And frankly, also, I mean, you haven't actually seen these works, Josh, but the paintings themselves are actually... I've never seen anything like them.
Sure, but
I'm hearing... that isn't in itself, like, valuable.
From what I'm hearing, it sounds like the initial reaction is, like, oh, this is hilariously weird.
No, I wouldn't even say that. They're actually kind
okay.
of,
I wish I'd known we were talking about this in this episode.
I mean, I almost say more like
I would have
kind
looked some of the stuff up.
dreamlike and transfixing, and like you can't get them out of your head in kind of a disturbing way, but like, you know, it's kind of the content that a lot of like really religious images have.
I see.
Clearly very much on purpose, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I just sort of remembered that was why I had invited Rob here in the first
Okay.
place.
Sorry, I just keep this when you get me onto a topic like this, I will just go on, which is what I feel like I'm doing. So please, like, you know, stop me if I'm getting onto something.
You're making our job very easy.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have it? That's fine. I was going to suggest that at this point we move on to what
I didn't know we were going to talk about.
What Josh didn't know we were going to talk about. Which it's not like you prepared for that either, frankly.
I did a little bit.
You did. You're right. You looked at one of those articles.
I got a sense of it.
That's wacky, you said.
Listen, this is much better than talking about some artists that I've never even heard of in my life.
You have heard of him. We talked about it yesterday.
Yeah, one time.
I should have like. Here, I'm going to show you a Henry Darger piece.
Okay, here we go.
Instantly, I pronounced that because the first time that I heard his spoken was in a MoMA song.
I'm just going to stay parked here while I look at this.
This is what these look like.
Okay, and I'll put this up on the screen too. Okay, yeah, good use of color.
It's you know.
They look kind of like children's book illustrations.
They're traced, I think.
Yeah.
But you can see, like, these are enormous canvases too. Right.
We're not seeing any of the battles here though, or the. Yeah. Oh, there's a good one. That was on the cover of the McGregor book. I think that is the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, there's a. Oh, there's
with the ram's horns and the. So you can see these feel like they have some like essential aesthetic.
Yeah, there is some value to this. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's still weird.
Check out the goat-headed dude with the American flag.
You're giving me the work of like pulling up all the
images.
images.
That's the flag of Angelina, the main Christian nation. Like, it's basically an American flag, but instead of the stars, it's got a cross.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that. Well, we'll put a fucking to recreate the slideshow that we just did. Google Henry Darger and put it in the image search. And do image search. Anyway. The reason I pronounced it that way is because the first time I ever heard his name spoken aloud was in a MoMA song. All the little friends of Henry Darger, living large, dreaming larger.
That is something MoMA would sing about.
Yep. I guess there's nothing that rhymes with Darger.
Darker.
Darger, and that's not what we call a rhyme, Josh.
It's an approximate rhyme. It's good enough for songwriting.
You know what? It's not good enough for MoMAs.
I would argue if I knew any.
I have less wrong cult in my Google image search history. Anywho, so we wanted to talk about a couple of internet phenomena that Rob has made a study of, and I wanted to talk about Iris also, but
okay, I'm really a bad Iris talking about person because I can say things about it, but I actually know very little about. I haven't even read most of that thing's post, to be honest.
Okay,
so
I just basically wanted to point out and be like, well, this exists, this is hilarious, but let's talk about less wrong instead, since that is the thing that we know about. So, everybody who I've told. Who I've told the basic facts about what less wrong is about. They're always like, okay, that sounds interesting, that sounds reasonable, that sounds interesting, right up until I get to the part with the Harry Potter fanfiction.
So it's always that. Are you doing the Harry Potter fanfiction before the, end of the world aspect?
I get to the... You're right. The end of the world aspect... Also one of those points, depending on,
It's funny because the Henry Darger fanfic has... Or, sorry, whoa.
The Henry Darger fanfic?
Harry Potter. Henry Darger and the Sorcerers. So the Harry Potter... Henry Darger and the Methods of Rationality. The Harry Potter fanfic...
Which is called Henry Potter. Which is called Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality.
There we go. Thank you.
Yes.
It has been their biggest source of, I don't want to say recruitment, but getting people interested in them.
That's the intentionality behind that, surely.
So what's less wrong?
Yeah, here we go. Good. Okay. The problem is there's no good answer to that question. I mean, Henry Darger was a relatively, like, easy topic to introduce, to be honest.
Less Wrong, if I understand it correctly, Less Wrong's introduction to itself is that it's a community for people who want to apply the study of cognitive biases to self-improvement.
Yes, that's pretty much what it is. So okay, if I can give, like, a little thumbnail sketch, if I can try to, so Less Wrong is essentially, it started out with a blog called Overcoming Bias. And you'll notice a transition here. Overcoming bias and Less Wrong mean similar things, but they have very, very different connotations. Mm-hmm. That was a deliberate response to a bunch of people saying, well, you can't fully overcome your bias, which is true. So they just called it Less Wrong, like you're just gonna, like, you know, not overcome them, but, you know, kind of go in the right direction, which was a good name. I think Less Wrong is a great name.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, so the original blog, Overcoming Bias, was sort of a co-blog, basically between two people. Robin Hanson, who's a George Mason University economics professor, a pretty weird guy. I don't like his stuff that much. He wasn't why I read Overcoming Bias back in the day. He writes a lot about, like, from a sort of very, very libertarian, weird perspective about, like, how everything everyone does is, like, signaling to each other how great they are, and it's sort of like a latter-day Thorstein Veblen kind of thing. And then, so he's the other guy who was much more popular. I liked him better. There's a guy named Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is describes himself as an artificial intelligence researcher. He's a former child prodigy in mathematics who didn't go to high school, didn't go to college, but just kind of, you know, I mean, I think he didn't really need to, at least as far as mathematics was concerned, but just kind of turned into a guy who I don't really know how to. I
just love that. He didn't go to high school. He didn't go to college. He just turned into a guy.
I mean, well, I'm trying to describe. I don't really know what he was doing between, like, you know, turning 18 and becoming, you know, the Less Wrong guy.
Yeah,
but
it's like Jesus Christ. He was in the wilderness.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, so he's a guy who, well, what he does now at least is he has a major position in this thing that was formerly called the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence. It changed its name to the Machine Intelligence Research Institute after a battle that it lost with Ray Kurzweil at his Singularity University. And what it is it's a non-profit, and what they devote themselves to is the idea that artificial intelligence, if we develop it, and if it becomes smarter than us, and there's this whole complex of ideas called, you know, the singularity, that artificial intelligence might become smarter than us, and if it got smarter than us, it would very quickly become smarter and smarter, because if we could design intelligence smarter than us, then it would be smarter and would be able to design even smarter, and blah, blah, blah. There's sort of a feedback loop argument there. Right. And so people like Eliezer Yudkowsky, people at this institute, got really, really worried about what if it's not friendly to us? What if it's like an unfriendly god, this thing that we make, and sort of takes off? And they are convinced, through a number of highly sort of abstruse arguments, that if we don't basically mathematically build into the specification of these things that they should be friendly to us, they will not be. And so they have this idea that essentially, you know, that this is going to happen, we're going to make these things almost certainly. And if we don't sort of program them in the way that these people want them to, they will fuck us up. At best, they'll, like, destroy the world. At worst, they'll, like, you know, create a virtual reality hell and send us all to it. So, like, you know, and so anyway, so that's sort of what Yudkowsky does. But he devotes a lot of time to writing sort of kind of weird, but essentially kind of sober and academic, apparently knowledgeable stuff in the direction of, like, how would we design this specification that would ensure that these computers would be friendly to us and stuff. And so what he wrote about on this blog, anyway, getting back to Overcoming Bias, what he wrote about on this blog was not really about that stuff very much. Mostly it was about, you know, cognitive biases, stuff in the sort of heuristics and biases, social psychology literature, the kind of stuff you might have read about in books like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and writing about kind of applying that to day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. And I think, so which much of it I found very interesting. He's a very entertaining, vivid, kind of fun, colorful writer. But there were always, you would read his posts and there would be these weird parts where he would just seem to kind of, there would be an opening into something that I didn't quite get. And a lot of that was this stuff linking up with the sort of apocalyptic AI stuff. Uh-huh. And so anyway, after Overcoming Bias kind of split up, it basically became Robin Hansen's personal blog. Yudkowsky split off to form a blog called Less Wrong, which Yudkowsky just wrote on it. He wrote this sort of corpus of blog posts that are now called the Less Wrong sequences, which are these things you've got to read through them if you want to be a real Less Wrong person. It's created this kind of community around it. A lot of other people were doing the community posts there. A lot of people from the community donate to Yudkowsky's, or to the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, and there's a lot of really strong sense of community there. There are people who have, like, meetups. There's a meetup in New York that's kind of the biggest one, and, like, they have an intense sense of community. Like, people from it have gotten married. There's an example of people from it who got married, and, you know, Yudkowsky officiated their wedding. So the point I'm kind of making, I'm not, like, saying these things to pry into people's personal lives. I'm saying that this thing functions as this extremely tight-knit community that almost looks in some ways like a religious type of community.
Alright.
But it's kind of all connected.
Well, they explicitly do events which are meant to be non-religious alternatives to religious events and communities. Like they're non-denominational or nicely done. Christian. Christmas type
winter
solstice event that they did with the communal singing and the readings from the sequences. And,
that sounds pretty weird.
Yeah, very earnest, very sad, like, intonations of Yudkowsky's blog posts. And I feel bad, like, this was so seriously presented. I went to this thing. I feel bad now that I'm saying this because I went to this thing and, like, am describing it in a way that is funny, and this was a guy, like, you know, saying this thing very sincerely.
So are these gatherings held in the interest of rationality? I don't quite understand.
Yes, I mean, in a sense, it's like these people read these blogs, and they get really into these kinds of ideas that are all kind of, like, connected. The very, like, sober, like, you know, Less Wrong, biases kind of stuff is all kind of linked in this whole continuum network with all of the really far-out AI stuff. And these people kind of get into all of these ideas at once, and then they really, I think, want to hang out with people who are into all of them at once. There's a lot of, like, internal jargon that, you know, that starts getting used a whole lot.
Can we please read an example from this blog?
Sure, absolutely.
What kind of example do we want?
One that I thought was sort of interesting, partly because I couldn't really tell what I was reading, but from what I could understand, it seemed really bizarre, was this one called Substitution, I think. Replaceability, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think most of the recent ones are not going to be by Yudkowsky, but it's sort of by community members.
So,
I mean, you'll have to tell me if you feel this is a good representation.
So, 3B, markets aren't perfect spheres.
Well, hold on, let's start from the beginning here, because this thing has a very clear purpose, a statement of purpose at the beginning.
Suppose I'm trying to evaluate the consequences of taking job X. Here's a sequence of hopefully decreasingly naive ways to think about the impact of my decision.
Go ahead, sir.
I don't know if the later analyses are actually reasonable, but I'd really like to see more intellectually serious discussion of this issue by people who understand the world. That's an interesting phrase. And particularly economics better than I do. I wouldn't be surprised if more sophisticated versions of this analysis are already well understood amongst economics. Skip to section 6 if you want the punchline.
Okay, hold on. Read number 1 first.
Okay, number 1. I should look at the direct consequences of doing job X and choose a job for which those consequences are best.
Okay. That seems like a completely reasonable statement to me. This is where I'm coming from on this.
I think Isaac's jumping to 6 for the punchline.
This is a long punchline. What I'm really doing when I decide to choose my job on the basis of altruistic concerns in addition to monetary compensation is changing the aggregate demand of laborers. In a world where all laborers made their decisions on the basis of only monetary compensation, the jobs that got done would be those that produced the most economic value. In a world where all laborers made their decisions on the basis of altruistic impact, the jobs that got done would be those that produced the most direct altruistic impact. In intermediate worlds, in which the labor force...
I couldn't gloss it. I know what he's saying. He's responding to some people saying another thing.
Okay.
Basically, this ties into stuff that is connected to Less Wrong. There's this complex of ideas called effective altruism, which is essentially, like, the idea that, you know, you want to make the world a better place. And so the basic sort of lowest tier of effective altruism is just like, okay, maybe you'll donate some money to charity. You probably should if you have some excess money because, like, you know, it's a good thing. But then you should, like, look at different charities and look at different... This is the big thing. Look at different charitable causes. You know, they tend to be really interested in, like, you know, health charities, for instance, because they think those are the ones that do the most good in the world.
Smooth driving there, Jackson.
and so the effective altruism is kind of like one of these things where, like, okay, we want to do charity, like, rationally. We want to compare things, compare numbers, crunch numbers. And so then one of the things... So this is where it gets weirder. On another tier, you have people who say, okay, I want to really kind of devote my life to, you know, making other people's lives better, and kind of the... You know, traditional way to do that is to go into a line of work that directly has that effect.
It's curious that all of these assumptions are kind of baked into this essay, because when I read this thing, I honestly made an earnest effort of reading, like, all the points, and, like, I couldn't figure out exactly what it was treating as less naive.
Oh yeah, this is pretty, like, far along in, like, the Talmudic commentary on this stuff. This is not necessarily for beginners, but kind of I think the idea. Okay. The idea is that, so there are these people who basically say, well, I think I could go and work at a nonprofit, which is what people do to, like, feel like they're helping the world, but I'm not sure I would be great at being a nonprofit guy. Maybe I'm one of these type of super rationalist types who'd be, like, good at being a quant on Wall Street, and I could make money that way. I could make a lot of money, and I think that there are all of these charities doing really good work that don't necessarily need more people, but they really, really need a lot more money. And most of the quants on Wall Street, of course, are not going into it out of altruism, and they're just spending their money on stuff that doesn't really help anyone, probably just makes them miserable, ultimately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go be a quant on Wall Street, make lots of money, and then just send it all to, like, buy mosquito nets. So this is a common idea that people have.
Cool. I just want to share my first impression when I read that thing, which was, this seems to take a pretty simple question and turn it into a paralyzing web of outside concerns.
With that's the whole rationality movement, really, in a nutshell. They don't really believe in simple questions. They believe in...
I mean, which I find very sympathetic.
Because, totally,
you know,
yeah.
Generally, there aren't simple questions.
It's one of the reasons I love reading these people, because they have this kind of mentality. It's like, no, just take everything into account. I'm serious. I want to figure it out. I know the world is complicated. Just put it all in there. God damn it. You know, it's sort of like, yeah, I'm gonna bite the bullet attitude, which I really like in a way.
Although, you know, it's the risk that is always attached with building up this level of what Josh says is paralyzing, and what you said is Talmudic commentary. Basically, this attempt to, like, fine tune your and calibrate these things is that you end up having to rely on a web of pre-existing axia, which may have some real turds at the bottom of the logical chain, which unfortunately in this case there are a couple of those built into built into the root system.
I'm curious if there have been any positive examples of people actually taking what this site talks about and applying it to their lives, which I understand is kind of the idea, the hope.
Our testimonials must exist.
They do, yeah. I think fewer of them exist than Less Wrong would like to, and there's been some talk of, like, well, if rationality is so great, why aren't we, like, you know, basically winning at life all the time? Winning is not my term, it's their term.
Okay, right.
And,
there's one of the turds at the bottom of this logical chain.
No, there's a lot of interesting stuff you can read into a lot of this terminology. A lot of the terminology comes from Bukowski himself, and he has some really weird... Anyway, sorry, but there have been testimonials of, like, you know, people who have... Often it's just, like, people who've improved their kind of self-control, you know, kind of basic level stuff. Not like I did this super complex thing, and now I am, like, you know... donating, you know, huge amounts of money to charity.
It's in this sort of, like, you know, a life without a system of rules may be improved by the addition of a system of rules, whether that's Alcoholics Anonymous or...
Yeah, it's not really clear, but there are testimonials of people whose lives have clearly been improved by doing this stuff, and usually it's by doing the simplest, like, you know, think about when you might be biased, think about when you... Like, so, you know, motivated reasoning is, like, a term in... cognitive psychology, for instance, when, like, you know, when you're... This is one of these terms that I didn't know about, and then I read about it on Less Wrong, for instance. You know, do you guys know this term, motivated reasoning?
No.
Okay, it's that thing you do when you, like... You know when you want to do something, and then your mind immediately produces arguments for doing it, and they're good arguments,
right.
But you wouldn't have produced it if you didn't want to do it, and you're clearly not looking at it from like a unbiased. This is the argument.
Absolutely. I had a friend in college who was convinced that was the only thing that human reasoning ever was.
Well, and it's the thing. Like, of course, I realized on some semi-conscious level that I did that all the time before I learned the term motivated reasoning. But to be honest, since I learned that term, I'm noticing myself doing it and identifying it a lot.
Absolutely,
more. And that seems good to me. For instance,
having a name for these things helps.
Yeah.
So it's like I think it's one of those things where it's like clearly like there, I'm when you look at the broad picture, and the broad picture I'm going to put in the most uncharitable way possible.
Sure.
The broad picture is that there are a lot of people giving Eliezer Yudkowsky money essentially to sit and write Harry Potter fan fiction in an attempt to avert the robot apocalypse.
Yes, that is entirely true.
And so you look at that, and then you think, well, that must be indicative of some sort of root and branch corruption in like the ideological makeup of this organization, which does not appear to actually be true. What it is really a highlights the flaw of it in any organizational or community mindset, which can be exploited.
Yeah, sure.
But but that doesn't mean that there are no like that there are not things that are correct, and B, that there are not things that are that have utility within the framework of this organization. So you're going to say something?
Well, yeah, I think so. One of the reasons this is so fascinating to me, and this is like a fascination for me, as I'm sure you guys know because you read my blog, I'm just like talking about it constantly, which is weird because I'm talking about it in this very like sort of snide, like, oh look, I found Yudkowsky saying this like silly thing. Oh look, I'm going to post about it. But it's clear like I'm really fascinated by this stuff. And
I've never heard that voice applied to your blog before.
that is the voice you should always. but like no, that's just But
I feel like that you do that as a way of trying to defend yourself against like ascribing to this whole hog because you find it.
Oh no, that's entirely true, and I find a lot of this very compelling and interesting. And I want a lot of it is kind of the defensive, like, yeah, I'm interested, but I know. Basically.
Right.
But so like a lot of what's fascinating to me about it is like, so they have a lot of good stuff, and a lot of the good stuff that they say is the more basic stuff, the more grounded stuff, the more, in my opinion, the more like hey, there are these biases, you should pay attention to them. Maybe you should donate to charity. Maybe you should think about which charities you're donating to. Things like that.
My thought, though, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but my feeling about that is that you don't need a giant organization and community to say that sort of.
The giant organization community exists to fulfill another set of needs.
Sure, and I mean, I think so. I think there is this issue of like when people. So I think part of it is an explicit attempt to create a movement based around the ideas of like acknowledging when you're biased, looking for evidence and being able to say things like, I don't know, but so for instance, that guy who said like, I expect people who know more about the world will have more sophisticated versions. Like that sounds kind of silly, but that's very much the kind of statement that is encouraged.
That's really worrying to me though, because it's a sort of a classic appeal to authority, which within these sorts of movements tends to become an abrogation of personal responsibility.
Oh, sure. No, and I want to kind of brag at that tangent just because. Sorry, I'm not having a conversation again.
It's okay. Josh is going to be trying to park this. Holy shit, that counts. Never mind.
I can unhook the trailer.
We're done. It looks like.
I mean, I was hoping I could do that fail to park that truck for hours while you talked about that because there's kind of a beautiful symmetry to the conversation.
We can go 2 steps forward.
I think we definitely have Rob back because we barely scratched the surface of this, and there were a bunch of other stuff that I wanted to talk to him with him about. But we
could do another episode right now.
A 2-parter? Well, maybe we should break for dinner first. But anyway,
Bye.
Really?
No. What? Huh?
You're not going to let him finish his thought?
Oh yeah, finish your thought.
What was my thought? Was I finishing?
All right, we're done.
Bye.